Hello and welcome to Your Creative Midlife. I'm Betsy Bush. We've been following the journey that my guest Graham Broyd has taken as a first-time author, from developing a personal story into a manuscript to be published by Forbes imprint Advantage Press. In August, I was honored to be asked by Graham to help him launch Backpack Jacket Surfboard on its publication. Here we are at the Scarsdale Golf Club talking to a packed house about his journey as an author and, as the book's subject, a 20-year-old student from England hitchhiking across America.
Graham, I think a lot of people have heard what the book is about, but not everyone. So I would like you to describe, actually fairly briefly, because we want to cover some ground here. Your book covers several different layers of your life. So I'd like you to describe just what is going on here with Backpack Jacket Surfboard, and maybe that's a good place to start.
Okay. And by the way, we're unscripted here, right?
Totally.
Yes. So I have no idea what she's going to ask me. So yeah, the book, just to give you those people who don't know the core of it, I was a student in England. I won a scholarship to study at the Library of Congress, which was a big deal from England. 6 weeks study, flight out to Washington, D.C. and back, and a small amount of money for a cheap hotel and some food. And so I decided I would sell that ticket that I got out to D.C. and buy one to Los Angeles because I wanted to go surf Malibu Beach. I was 20. Who wants to go and sit in the library? And then I thought I would surf for a week. I had a look at a map, and I thought, well, I'll just hitchhike across. You know, there's LA and there's DC. I just get across there in a week, and then I would study for 4 weeks and go home. And so that is the core of what the book is. But it's from there came like 20 standard stories that I have told for 40 years. My family table laughs because they've heard them 1,000 times. But I think what you're hinting at,
yes.
Right? So there became a second stage, right? So when I retired last year, I thought for fun, I would write down those 20 stories. And I thought I would self-publish them. And no one's going to publish me. You know, they're just my silly stories. Sorry, okay, thank you. And so I wrote them down. And after I wrote them down, or as I was writing them down, I was approached by Forbes. Very interesting situation. So I went back in 2024 to retake some photographs of the original trip in 1980. And I was posting that trip on Facebook. Forbes had me on a list. Forbes had me on a list because I was a former CEO, and Forbes likes to publish books, I'll oversimplify, where former CEOs tell you how brilliant they were. And if you pick up the book at the airport, you read how brilliant they were. Maybe you learn one or two things that'll help you in your career. Forbes, general business book. So they had me on a list. I didn't know. They were tracking me. And they weren't interested in all my posts about my hitchhiking trip around California. But in all those posts, there was one comment about how I was also going to write a business book. One comment. I wrote like 20,000 words on Facebook over, this trip. And so they sent an email. I thought it was spam, but didn't get rid of it. And it was like nicely written. And I looked up the person who'd signed it, and I could find him on LinkedIn. It was the vice president of publishing of Forbes. Oh, you looks like someone who might be ready to write a book. So they contacted me. They asked me questions. They asked me questions about the book I was going to write. And I said, well, I'll write this hitchhiking book. I'm like, they're not going to have any interest in a hitchhiking book. And they said, well, why don't you send it to us? And it's like 90% done. I said, why don't you send it to us? And so we can at least tell how you write. Give us a sense of how you write. And so we can tell whether we might have interest in that business book you're going to write. I was a little nervous because it wasn't complete. I hadn't even spell-checked it. And I thought, if I send this in, they may take one look at it and go, we have no interest in this guy doing a business book. I don't want to lose that opportunity in the future. But I sent it in and finished it quickly and then sent it in. And then, like 10 days later, there was a Zoom call to follow up. And my first suspicion that something was up was there were 9 people on the Zoom call. And so after we'd done some introductions, I said, where all these people come from? What are they doing here? They said, well, all these people read at least a part of your book, and they wanted to see the person that they could see on the page. And I'm like, okay. And I said, is that a good thing? And they said, oh yeah, that's a very good thing. And they also want to know when the sequel's coming out, because they want to know what happened to this person. And I'd always been vilified as a writer when I was a banker, because as you're hearing tonight, I talk too much and I write too long.
Graham.
Yeah?
You talk too much.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
You cut me off.
I was warned. Here's this table over here. Okay. If anybody wants to hear the rest of the story, you can look up the podcast episode in which Graham told the same story. Okay.
That's why she's good at what she does.
Look for Graham's podcast episode on yourcreativelife.com. Okay. So, but maybe I can just fill in. Okay, you went back to those. You had 24 photographs in an album, and you went back to try to retrace your steps.
Yep.
And try to recreate this trip that you had. And what did you learn about yourself when you were putting those stories of that 21-year-old person in the white shorts and the backpack and a jacket, packed up and the surfboard? What did you learn about yourself?
Yeah, so I think probably the most important thing that I took away was I didn't realize how formative those 7 weeks would be. And so when I went back and went back to those locations and took the identical photographs from the identical spots, I realized, and this was with the help, someone very casually said to me at an airport waiting lounge, who knew a little bit about who I was and heard me telling some stories, suddenly said, oh, I can see how the person sitting in front of me became that person. And that was from just hearing some of these stories. And when I told that to my Forbes editor, she said, oh my goodness, she said the hairs stood up on the back of my neck. He said, because I had picked up on this, what the other people at Forbes had picked up on this was that this was a life learning book. I saw it as 20 silly stories. So this is a life learning book. And so that was really been a core aspect then of what the book became.
And I have to say, having read the book, the writing is so good that there are places where you're not sure what's going to happen to Graham. It's like, if you can imagine, okay, he flies over to Malibu because he wants to surf, but then he has a lot of other stops along the way. And one thing I kind of wonder about when you think, oh, I'll fly to Malibu and then I'll hitchhike back to Washington, is there's a desert on the way that you have to cross. And as a hitchhiker, someone with very little money, right? There's no financial cushion.
Yep.
You didn't have a credit card or anything. You had what you had in your pocket. There were times when I really wondered, how's he going to get out of this situation? I mean, you did a really good job writing those lessons. I'm wondering, what surprises you when you look back at that 21-year-old making that trip? Was it just the lack of planning, this kind of naivete heading into it all? I also wondered about the disinterest of your parents. You know, like your parents are like, oh, well, when you come back, make sure you go to this station so it'll be easier for us to pick you up. You know, when you get back from your great adventure, you know, what?
Yeah, but you and I have talked about this before. It's kind of an interesting perspective, particularly for those people who have kids who are in their 20s or people who are in their 20s. So I was 20 years of age. My parents knew I was going to LA and I was going to be getting across to study in Washington as quickly as I could. And off I went. They asked me to send them some postcards while I was away, because that was a form of communication, and to call them. So it turns out during the 7 weeks, no postcards, and 2 phone calls, one to say I was coming home late, an extra week, and the second one on the penultimate day to say, I'm coming home, can you pick me up at the train station? That was it. And you know, you mentioned the money thing as well, which is, you know, contextual for how people operate today, right? Obviously pre-iPhones. So I ran out of money, and there was no access to anything else. I had no credit card. As I say in the book, if my parents had been willing to send me some money, where the hell were they going to send it? You know, English guy with a red backpack somewhere in America, you know, that would be my address, right? There was no context that you people have, you know, on a phone or with finance, no credit card, no iPhone, nothing. I had cash and traveler's checks, and the traveler's checks went, and then the cash went.
No. Reading the book, I was really impressed by your self-reliance, your self-sufficiency. You were resourceful. Looking back on that, where did that come from? And has that carried on in your life? I mean, you talk about the life lessons you learned.
Yeah. So you could read the book and say this was just recklessness, easily. Pretty crazy stuff that I was doing out there. I think, you know, my parents brought me up with kind of one philosophy, which is they wanted us, my brother and I, to stand on our own 2 feet. That was kind of their primary philosophy. And so we leapt with those feet, right? And entered into crazy things. And, yeah, one of the great lessons still today I take from the experiences I had there was, get out of your comfort zone, right? Take some risks. You know, go. I love to travel. Travel places that other people don't travel, right? Meet different people, right? And those are things that I did, you know, then in probably a pretty scary way. And it all worked out, so I've kept doing it. Right.
And there is, talking about going places where other people don't go. There was early in the book, and I don't think I'm giving too much away, where your second photograph in your album is of a bullfighting ring in Tijuana, Mexico. And you had no idea, you had no memory of going there. Tell us what happened, because tell us what happened.
Yeah, so I had this Kodak Instamatic. Took 24 photographs. The only thing that I did in a disciplined fashion on the whole trip was manage those photographs. So the very first photograph in the book is of the air traffic control at Los Angeles airport, which is kind of a funny looking building. I took that photograph from the airplane. I was going from LA. My purpose was to get to Malibu Beach to go surf before I headed across. And so the second photograph in the book is me at a bull ring in Tijuana, Mexico. And so as I told my stories, my 20 stories for 40 years, I tell the story, and there was always this kind of thing, like, what the hell was I doing in Tijuana, Mexico? You know, it's 100 miles, you know, Malibu's, you know, people know from the news, is 20 or 30 miles north of LA. Tijuana's over 100 miles south and in a different country. And so I decided, one of the reasons I went back last year was to go to the same spots that I took the photographs, and hope it would jog my memory. I would go to this ballroom and go, now I know why I'm here. And so that worked out really well in a number of spots on the trip. I had a really fantastic new experience in 2024 going to Tijuana, Mexico, to a ballroom, but I still have absolutely no idea how I somehow went from LA to Tijuana on my way to Malibu. None. And I know I was there, I have the photos.
Well, when you talk about meeting people that you might not ordinarily meet, who did you meet when you went back to Tijuana? Because I think it's an interesting little sidebar.
So the bull ring, that I was unaware why I was there, the bull ring was built for a very famous Spanish matador who moved to Mexico. It was a big deal in 1980. Bullfighting was still a big deal back then. Going back to Tijuana in 2024, it was not advised. The area in Tijuana I was aiming for, not only did it have a U.S. State Department warning about going there, it had a Mexican State Department warning about going to that part of Tijuana. It was a nasty place, and I can assure you, having been there in 2024, it was a nasty place. I eventually found a new building that was a bull ring. I was in a very rough area. And run by the drug cartels in Tijuana, as I approached the spot on my Google Maps, said there might be a bull ring there. I saw a couple of people standing outside. I thought, am I crazy enough to get out of the car and walk and go and say hello to these people who were standing outside of the bull ring? Well, it turned out that one of those two people was the son of the matador, who they built the original Toreo de Tijuana, the bull ring in Tijuana, back in the 60s, the one I visited in 1980. And there was his son, two people standing outside a building in a parking lot. And, I introduced myself. They looked at me as if I was a little crazy. I showed him the photograph that I had from 1980, and he said to me, "That's the Toreo de Tijuana of my father, and we are building the new version right behind you right now, and it opens in 3 months." And this was his son.
This book is filled with moments like this. This is why it's such an amazing book. And I think the lesson that a lot of us take is like, get out of your comfort zone. I'm sure Betsy appreciated the trip south of the border, right? And there's some other things. I don't want to give too much away, but one of the pictures here that was on the slideshow and one of the banners here is of the Queen Mary ocean liner, the original one. In wartime, the deck is covered with thousands of servicemen, British servicemen. There is an interesting family connection, and I know you want to talk about it, and it is a remarkable story. Promise you won't give...
Yeah, no, it's difficult to do it quickly, yeah. Some people may have seen the banner out the front because it's a remarkable photograph, right? So this is the luxury Cunard cruise liner, the Queen Mary. It was built kind of in the Titanic era, high-end British luxury ship, to have to cross the Atlantic with a little over 2,000 passengers. During the war, so they converted it into a troop carrier. So the photograph that you'll see is a photograph from August of 1942 with 16,000 British troops on it, right, for a ship built for 2,000. They took 8-hour shifts, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours working under deck, and 8 hours out on deck. That ship went from Southampton to Halifax, Canada, My father was on December 23rd, 1942. It's a little chilly up in the northern Atlantic at that time of year, particularly if you're lying out on deck in woolen Air Force fatigues. And particularly as U-boats, Germany controlled most of the Atlantic at that time, were very eager to see a namesake ship like that with 16,000 British troops on it. So my father was on that ship. And, the story that, what the hell is that got to do with hitchhiking? So when I was in LA, I met with a high school friend, my father, for one night. And my father said, "Oh, you're over there, go see Alec." And Alec was one, just for context quickly, my father left school at 16. He showed me a photograph of his 16th year high school group. There's 21 of them. 4 survived 4. All the others were killed by the end of the war before their 21st birthday. Alec was one, and my father was one who survived it. They were in Bomber Command. It's a famous British group. So this was Alec. He moved to LA. Alec took me. It was my first day in Los Angeles. Disney World? Hollywood Stars? Hollywood Boulevard? No. He took me to see the Queen Mary. I'm like, what the hell was he doing? Taking me to the Queen Mary. He never said a word about my father's connection. He knew my father had been on it. He knew that it would be a good thing that I saw it, and that at some point in my life, my father would tell me about it. But he hadn't. And so it wasn't until I went back in 2024 that I pieced the whole thing together. And kind of landed the whole story and the connection that made it. Yeah.
For those of you who are getting the book, this is just the beginning of the story. And we don't want to spoil it for you because there is an incredible family connection there with not only Graham's family, but also the Jordan family, Betsy's family as well. So buy the book and find out what it is because it is jaw-dropping. Seriously. I wonder too, Graham, with your father joined the service at 17, was sent over to the States to learn how to fly planes, bombers. And by the time he was 18, he would be back and he would be eligible age-wise for service. So think of that, 17 and 18.
Yeah. He was when he was on that ship, he had just turned 18. Right. And the theory was he tried to sign up early, as people were in those days, as a 17-year-old, and they knew that. And he wanted to fly, and you couldn't learn to fly in England during the war. You get shot down, and not a good way to learn to fly. So they sent you to America, and they had a Lend-Lease program where people gave up private airstrips so they could teach you how to fly over there. 6 months. My father spent 6 months during the war in Terrell, Texas. There's a museum there, which we have been to. It has my father's photograph on the wall. So he when I went to the museum, didn't know it till I'd been to the museum, we were able to find out which ship he was on and when he was there. He hadn't ever told me, and which cohort he was on and which Queen Mary ship he had been on. He was, he signed up as 17 years of age, right? And he was signed up to Bomber Command, whose task was, sort of Churchill thing after the Blitz. We had to counterattack, build big bombers that could make it to the Ruhrgebiet in Germany, the industrial area, and back, no further, over, drop bombs, get back. And we'd have to, the people who were going to fly it, man it, everyone was already in the services, so we had to take the youngsters and train them. So 110,000 people in Bomber Command, 57,000 of them were killed. Average number of missions, 3 average age 23. And so that's what my father survived it, was always guilty that he was a survivor.
Maybe this, hearing this story, maybe the idea that you were just hitchhiking across the United States maybe didn't seem so outrageous, because your parents' generation had literally fought World War II and won the war at great cost, and really in a way that we didn't experience, because the British were right there and they were bombed as well. So I love the bringing that story in your and we even get into it a little bit more when you finally get to Washington. But I want to get back to publishing the book and your experience with a professional publisher as opposed to self-publishing. And I want you to explain what the meaning of the title of your book is for those of us who haven't read the book.
Yeah. So my book, in my mind, was always Welcome to America. That's what when I told people I was going to write a book, it was going to be Welcome to America. It was me coming to America. Then I got a publisher. The publisher says, that's been done before. 5 times. And it's a poem, and it's a Prince song. So you can't do Welcome to America, right? And actually, it was less about the copyright than it was about, and I'm learning this really now, is when you put the 3 words into Google, what comes up? And those other books would have come up, and mine would have been down the list. There's no one who's written a book called Backpack, Jacket, Surfboard. So it's the first thing that comes up. And then they you know, they came out with this. This is actually one of the few things in the book was them, not me. And we had a funny argument about it as well. I said, well, backpack's obviously the first thing I have. I'm a hitchhiker. I'm going out to California to surf. That's the second thing I do. The jacket doesn't come into the story until Las Vegas. So it has to be backpack, surfboard, jacket. And they're like, no, that doesn't sound right. They won the debate. And the thing about the jacket as well, for context, is, right, I lived at a backpack for 7 weeks, right? It was a relatively small backpack. In that backpack was a not the type of jacket you'd expect to be hitchhiking with. I took with me a smart wool lapelled jacket. Took up about a quarter of my backpack. So I thought, you never know when you need a smart jacket.
He's English.
It turned out to be a wonderful decision. Yeah, so that's where the title came from. They put it in, I've got used to saying backpack, jacket, surfboard rather than a different order. And so that's how we got. And the colors, are the yellow of the surfboard, the red of the backpack, and the blue of the California sky.
There we go. The jacket, let's advance a little bit, because I think people need to know that you found so many interesting highways and byways on your way from Malibu to Washington, D.C., that you found yourself in New Orleans somehow with only...
Look at a map. Just look at a map. It's obvious, right? You're going from Malibu to D.C.
Right. But you find yourself in New Orleans with 6 days to do your research project, which was... Okay.
Yeah.
So I think you need to explain what happened next.
What happened in New Orleans?
Well,
which one do you want?
How did you... Well, I mean, imagine you're there for a 6-week study, research, writing at the Library of Congress to write a thesis on the Panama Canal Treaty, which was brand new at the time, right? And here you are, you frittered away all, 5 weeks of this, and here you have less than...
I think it was frittering away.
Well, you realized you were at a point where if this doesn't get done, you might have to pay the money.
Yeah.
and you would have...
I was in serious.
You were in serious trouble.
I was in
right?
serious trouble. I was aware I was in serious trouble, and I wasn't really sure what to do. I arrived in D.C. I stayed in a youth hostel, and here's my meeting strangers again story. Right? So in the youth hostel in Washington D.C. was Jake, the Australian journalist. Now, I'll take a leap of faith here. Jake probably wasn't the most successful Australian journalist. He was staying in a youth hostel. I told Jake what I was doing. I was meant to be studying for 6 weeks, and in the Library of Congress, I only had 6 days left. He thought that was hilarious. And I told him my subject. He actually knew a lot about the Panama Canal. It was quite a prominent fact back then. And he said, Panama Canal. You need to interview Senator Howard Baker. Senator Howard Baker, so at that time, President Carter, Democrat, was the President of the United States. Howard Baker was the Republican head of the Senate, leader of the Senate. And because Carter wanted the canal treaties, he wasn't going to get the legislation passed without Republican support in the Senate. Most of the Republicans were against doing it. Howard Baker, the head of the Republicans in the Senate, was for canal. So if they were going to pass the legislation, it was because of what Howard Baker could do. Howard Baker was a very prominent and well-known politician, ran for president, ended up in all kinds of prominent roles. So, I'm a hitchhiker, a backpack in a youth hostel in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, I'm going to meet with Senator Howard Baker. He said, sure, we'll call him. So after a couple of beers, which he plied me, we got as many quarters as we could. There was a payphone on the wall in the youth hostel. We accumulated all our quarters so we could make a telephone call to Howard Baker's office. It's the end of August. He's not going to be there, right? And but we called. He convinced me to call. I called. Someone picked up the phone. And so I've been in contact with the person who picked up the phone on and off for 30 years after that phone call. He said, well, actually, the senator is in town, and he has a full schedule tomorrow, but if you're willing to come by and sit and wait, if he gets a cancellation, we might be able to slip you in. So the jacket came out. I washed my jeans overnight. They were still damp when I was in Senator Baker's office, and I dusted off my sneakers, and I interviewed Senator Howard Baker.
A lot of the storytelling I love about Graham are those little details, right? Unrolling the jacket, washing the jeans that are damp, but still damp the next morning. That's great. Graham, you love to tell stories, and you say storytelling plays an important role in your life, or has. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, and again, I didn't realize this. It's one of the very cathartic things that has happened to me in writing a book, and I would certainly encourage anyone else who's thinking of doing that to do it, even if you never sell a copy. I thought I'd sell 30 or 40 of these books, but I enjoyed the writing process. You learn a lot about yourself, in doing it. So some business people around, these tables around here, I thought maybe I was a good businessman. No, I was actually just a storyteller my whole career. All I would really do, right, is tell people stories, and whether it be, if you were trying to convince people to come work for you, whether you were trying to explain a change in strategy, whether you were trying to sell something over a telephone in a trading floor. When I look back at it now, I'm like, actually, I was just telling stories. That's all I've ever done. And so, it's kind of been an interesting perspective on actually who I even was and am.
You've told me that writing this book has really solidified or made clear to you a lot of these important moments in your life. And you're lucky enough to have, written the book, had it published, all of that. what do you think the role writing could play for other people who might not ever get their book published, but maybe the process of writing is a useful one? What do you think?
Yeah, and again, I would encourage people. I never used to have any conversation with anyone about writing. Why would I? I was not a writer, and now I do. And you realize how many people out there have written, are writing, want to write. And so my whether it be 2 pages or 1,000 pages, my personal experience is it's just been a wonderful thing. I remember James calling me, my son calling me one day early on in the writing for some kind of reason on the phone. And I picked up the phone. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'd actually just been crying and laughing." I said, "Well, why?" He said, "Because I'm writing my stories." And it was this wonderful feeling of just kind of getting it out onto a page. So it was really, just great. And then, I feel like I got free therapy, right? I had a wonderful, Forbes gave me, this is one of the amazing things, a 9-person team. This is the difference between, self-publishing and a publishing book. I have 4 editors. It's all my words. And the most important one was what they call a development editor. So they read my book and they basically said, the stories are good, they're good to go, don't need to do anything with them. But can we draw out between the stories both the personal formative stuff and also a view on America, right? That we maybe get to in a second. And so she was saying to me, okay, at the end of chapter 3, you say, well, that story had a big impact on you. We said, well, how? And when? And why? I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I was just happy telling my story. And they said, well, can you just go back and think about that for a second, right? And see if you can just add a couple of paragraphs between the stories, just to bring that so that people who don't know you, right, can get something from that. People who know you'll just enjoy the stories. People who don't know you can get you, if you can just expand on that a little. So that was, I thought editing was, spell check, right? But editing was just prompting for me to just go to different places, and that process was, okay, so it's Graham Broyd going back to 1980. That felt pretty good. That was a good experience. And then having to go through the rest of your life and think, well, how did that impact me? Where and how? And so I feel like all those sessions, they were, initially weekly and then twice weekly. They were like free therapy. That was free therapy for me, right? But it was technically editing.
Can you think of an example of an episode, someone you met who, when you look back at it now after 40 years, you're thinking, my view of life or my view of the world or how I treat people changed because I had that encounter?
Can I say that for my reading?
Yes. Yes, you can.
Sorry.
No. Do you? Okay, not everyone can write a book. You wrote a book.
Yeah.
What was this is very inside baseball, what was your writing habit? Did you sit down for an hour every morning? How did you get it done? Because I think a lot of people are like, I'd love to write a book, but I don't have that habit. That's kind of
And I may not be a good example, right? So my starting format for this was these stories I've told for 40 years. So really, for me to write, once Forbes had told me, I always thought I was a terrible writer. Forbes had told me that you may be a terrible writer for banking, right? Correct. But actually for this type of work, you're good, right? Go with it. As soon as they gave me that permission, it was okay. I just had to find some time in my day. I'm like, here's a story coming. And I just had to write it down. I mean, it really did not take me time. And my editor, my development editor, when she would say, go back, revisit 1980, think of all the impact, try and get something for me, but, in a week, I would be done in an hour. It used to annoy the hell out of us. She'd get an email 2 hours after we finished the call. We didn't have another call for a week. So I found the writing process, the easy process. All the rest of the stuff, it's time consuming, but the writing I actually found easy.
I say you're very lucky.
I think
you're
I am.
very lucky.
Yeah.
Yes. I think we're getting close to wrapping this part up, but I just want to say, at the end, as you heard, Graham winds up in Washington. He's working at the Library of Congress, and during your lunch times, you get to wander around the Capitol, all the wonderful, buildings that make up our nation's capital. And you really, I think it was nice for someone, a native born, to kind of see that through your eyes, because you found it so impressive. And think of the access you had too, right? Senator Baker talked to you. You had conversations with other people. You entered the Library of Congress, which I've never seen, but you described it beautifully. And to just reflect on recent events. And I just want to thank you for putting that into words, because for a lot of us, I think we're reflecting on the state of things. And you did a beautiful job in transmitting how it felt to be a 21-year-old new to this, but really in awe of our beautiful Washington.
I think, and just taking it back to 1980, I had someone write a review, who was much better writer than me, and he wrote, "This is a love letter to America," and it hasn't come up in this conversation, and I think it's a relevant piece. I was, as someone from England at the time, not from a wealthy family or anything, and America just blew me away. Going California to San Francisco to Yosemite National Park, Death Valley, down in New Orleans, up to Washington D.C., eventually to New York. It was truly an incredible country to me in every way to look at, the people, the culture. I concluded and say result of my 7 weeks, then I would spend the rest of my life living and working in America. And so, it's thank you for bringing that up. It was in amongst everything else, it was a really impactful experience.